This is going to be a big topic. This is how to learn a skill. And in making this video, I do not claim to be some universal master of all skills or anything like that. But it is a topic that I haven't seen delved into very well on the web. And I think I'm able to at least point you in the right direction of like what to look into in order to get better at learning skills in general and some specific types of skills. And also this video was something specifically requested by some of my followers some months ago after reading a Quora answer that I wrote. So yeah, I hope this is valuable to you. I'm gonna try to make it so. Let's get into it. So let's start by categorizing different types of skills. So intelligence-based skills are skills where the difficulty of the skill lies entirely in how difficult it is to understand a concept, and in the number of concepts you need to understand. So this would be things like learning algebra, learning the grammar of a language, learning music theory or computer programming. As soon as I understand the distributive property, I am able to apply that concept to numerous different cases in algebra. As soon as I understand that in English you add an S to make things plural, generally speaking, I can apply that rule to many different words, and now I have the skill of pluralizing words, right? So intelligence-based skills are skills that once you understand a concept, you possess the skill. Wisdom-based skills are skills where that is not the case. You can understand all the concepts you want, but at the end of the day, you need to practice and you need to do repetition. You need to actually train your body and or your brain to be able to do the skill that you are trying to do. So examples of this would be ear training in music, running, any athletic skill, public speaking, doing comedy, socializing, right? The great majority of skills that we tend to think of as skills are wisdom-based skills. And I also want to say that this isn't a hard division. Basically, every single intelligence-based skill is going to have some degree of repetition and practice you're going to need to do in order to learn it. And pretty much every single wisdom-based skill is going to be more easily accessible by learning a technique that's going to accelerate your ability to do it. So there's always going to be a little bit of intelligence-based skills in every wisdom-based skill, and vice versa. But for the most part, being able to identify whether a skill is more intelligence-based or more wisdom-based is going to be a guide in determining what the best way to learn that skill will be. So keep that in mind for whatever skill you're trying to learn, and you can use that to inform what method, based on what I talk about later on, you're going to use. Another delineating thing for skills is how ambiguous versus clear success in that skill is. So, for example, I can determine if I have successfully done a math problem correctly pretty easily. I can use a calculator, a teacher can tell me whatever. There is a clear right answer. On the other hand, if I'm trying to write a piece of music, that is going to be relatively, it's relatively intelligence-based, I would say, but I don't necessarily know if my audience is going to like it. The success conditions for successfully writing a piece of music are more ambiguous. Weightlifting, for example, clear success, wisdom-based skill. I can see that I am making progress and lifting heavier and heavier weights. But if I'm an actor, again, I don't know if my audience is enjoying my performance necessarily very well. If I am socializing, if I'm being a comedian or something, I don't necessarily know for sure why they do or do not find my jokes funny. So any time that success is very clear and measurable, you can take a scientific approach to learning this skill. But any time that success is ambiguous and difficult to tell, it's going to be very difficult to do anything scientific because you can't really measure it. And these tend to fall into the category of arts. Lastly, I want to differentiate between what I call instantaneous versus take your time skills. And these are just skills that you either need to perform in real time or like in an instant, or they're skills that you can take a functionally indefinite amount of time in order to succeed at them. So classic example, a sport If you're playing football, you spend a whole lot of time preparing for the game, and then you have to perform the game in real time. You spend a lot of time thinking of your jokes for stand-up comedy, and then you perform the jokes in real time. As opposed to when you're writing a book, you can take effectively as much time as you need to write that book. You can take weeks, you can take months. So the way that you prepare those skills and learn those skills is very different from one another. So that's one last way we want to differentiate between the types of skills that we're learning. So very shortly, I'm going to get into how specifically, technically, to learn intelligence-based skills and how to learn wisdom-based skills. But before doing that, I want to talk about how do you go about finding resources with which to learn those types of skills. So let's touch on that. So I basically figured there are 4 categories of resources, 4 strategies, I don't even know what the right descriptor is, but 4 ways to learn skills. You can get teachers, you can consume media, other people can help you out, and you can try it out on your own. Those are basically the 4 approaches. Other people being like non-knowledgeable types, non-teachers. So let's talk about each of those categories. So I divide teachers into 3 categories. The first one being advocate teachers. Advocate teachers is a knowledgeable person that you pay money to teach you a skill. And they are, generally speaking, a private teacher to you or a private teacher to a small group of people. They are 100% invested in your success, and they are serving you specifically. They are not serving another institution. And most importantly, they are never going to be in a position where they need to explicitly judge you and potentially be a determining factor in your success in this skill. So they are not your boss. They are not auditioning for you or trying you out for a sports team. They are not grading you. The risks of this person is that in the event you ever master this skill, you don't need them anymore. Classic example, I do a fair amount of life and dating coaching. I have had many clients who, as soon as they found a significant other, no longer wanted to work with me anymore, which is fine. That was what we were going for. But if my primary income were coming from dating coaching, I sort of have a financial incentive to make it seem like you're making progress, but to never actually let you get in a position where you actually find a significant other, right? So I'm not even necessarily saying anybody in that profession deliberately acts on that, but it is a conflict of interest that exists in the advocate teacher paradigm. Okay, and then the other risk is you hire the teacher and they're bad at teaching, right? So we'll talk about how to deal with each of those in a moment. Mentors are very much like advocate teachers, except you're not paying them. They are doing it for non-financial reasons. Maybe they just like you personally. Maybe they like teaching. Maybe they see a lot of potential in you, and so they would like to see that potential come to fruition and see you be successful for the betterment of all humanity, or whatever reason like that, right? Other than that, they are basically identical to an advocate teacher. And the only risks here is if that non-monetary incentive ever changes, you risk losing your teacher, right? So if they're doing it because you like you, and you ever do anything that upsets them, you might lose your teacher. And also a mentor can also be bad at the skill, so that is always a risk. The third category is judging teachers. So judging teachers are teachers who do have a conflict of interest that's pretty explicit. They are a university professor. They are the coach of the sports team that you are on. They are your choreographer of the show that you're in, right? So they have part of their job, or maybe explicitly their job, is teaching you the skill, but they are also in a position where their primary loyalty is not to you and to your success. It is to another institution, and they are probably going to be in a position to judge whether or not you have succeeded in learning this skill for the benefit of that institution. So if they're your boss, they may be put in a position where they need to fire you if you don't do well enough, or not promote you, or whatever else, right? So the point is that at some point they're going to be in a position to judge you, and that can cause social conflicts with you, that can make you feel resentful, that can make you feel awkward, and it can just generally be a difficult situation to be in. Teachers are indispensable for wisdom-based skills in particular. They are absolutely essential for doing deliberate practice, which is an approach to learning wisdom-based skills that we'll discuss in several minutes. And advocate teachers and mentors are the most valuable people you will meet in your life, other than like your spouse. Okay, they are on your side. They have the knowledge that you need. When you find a good advocate teacher or a good mentor, it behooves you to do everything you can to maintain that relationship as long and as well as possible. Therefore, do not, if you can help it, do not convert that relationship into another type of relationship. As tempting as it would be to go and work at the company where your mentor is the boss, be aware that you're going to be changing that relationship, or you risk changing that relationship. I'm not saying that it has to, right? If everybody is communicative, if everybody is emotionally mature, and so on, this can work. But we're all human, and we all make mistakes, and things can go wrong. So you are generally better off not even risking it, because these relationships are so extremely valuable. So how do you mitigate risks with teachers? So we were talking about, like, how do you identify if they are actually competent to be a teacher? So this is difficult. There's no cut and dry perfect answer, but generally speaking, if they have a lot of recommendations from peers, mentors, and other teachers that you know, if the material that they teach coincides with the best media material that you have come across so far, that is an excellent green flag. And if they have good credentials, and if they have personally demonstrated success, or their students have been successful at the skill that you are trying to learn, that is also an excellent green flag. What are some red flags? They showboat a lot, and they wear or portray a lot of high status symbols, like they drive around in an expensive car, or they wear a lot of jewelry, or they surround themselves with very attractive people. They speak in a lot of cryptic or pseudoscientific or magical terms. Whenever they talk about something about which you actually do know a lot, they are wrong. And if they have a setup where they have special secrets that only the inner circle will know, if they're doing that and you got to pay a lot of extra money or stay committed a certain number of years in order to get those secrets, that's a red flag too. So beware of anybody who's exhibiting these qualities. They are probably charlatans. They are probably just trying to exploit you. Yeah. Oh, and mitigating the personal risk. So, like, teachers want to be successful at teaching, mentors especially. So when you come to your lessons, make sure you're well prepared and make sure you have an agenda of what you want to accomplish. Demonstrate that you value their time by actually putting your own time in and learning the skill, because presumably you really want to, and you're going to be working hard at this. I'd also recommend studying with multiple teachers. This helps mitigate the risk of if any one teacher is particularly bad at something. Also, if you ever lose the relationship with your teacher for whatever reason, you at least have another teacher that can continue to teach you. Yeah, so that's what I'd recommend. All right, moving on to media. So media is anything that you can study on your own without needing to depend on another person to come and teach you. This includes books, articles, video tutorials, audio recordings, and podcasts, anything like that. The benefit of this is that you have a lot of flexibility. You can learn at your own pace. The downside is you don't have anybody who you can go to for questions, and you don't have anybody checking in on you and serving as an additional source of motivation for you. Generally speaking, media is very good for intelligence-based skills. And while having a tutor or a teacher can be some benefits, having a really good book or a really good tutorial is oftentimes all you need, and there's not a lot of benefit to having another person there walking you through the material. It tends to be less useful for wisdom-based skills. However, it is useful for wisdom-based skills for a couple things. One is if the book recommends some really good exercises for you to practice, that can be really valuable. And also it can be used as a means of judging whether a teacher is going to be really good for you. So for example, when I was trying to find teachers and mentors for computer programming, I had read Clean Code by Bob Martin, I had read some books on test-driven development and things like that. And so when I met my mentor, when I've met some other really good developers that I've known, like they had read those books and they were able to like quote those books and critique those books with a high level of skill. So that was a really good indicator to me, wow, I have found a really skilled person here. I should pay attention to the sorts of things that they have to say and how they do their careers. Whenever you look for a piece of media, always be looking for a conflict of interest. If this is freely available, are they trying to sell me something down the line? Why is it free? Are they pushing an ideology? Are they trying to exploit me? Are they advertising in some way? Like, why is it free? Or how are they making their money? So always try to be aware of that, just like you try to be aware of that with any teachers that you hire. Some red flags in media to watch out for. If they claim to teach you a skill that solves every problem in your life, it's probably not going to be legit. If they use heavy use of anecdote or appeals to authority for why their methodology is valuable. If the things they say are unfalsifiable or counterfactual, and they use it as evidence. If they charge very large amounts of money for access to the media. And especially if it is a skill that you're trying to learn with highly ambiguous success or failure metrics. So classic example of this is diet plans. You pay a lot of money to get this super secret diet plan that will help you lose weight. And if you fail to lose weight, it's because you didn't follow the diet plan closely enough. And if you do lose weight, then clearly it was because of the diet plan, and they can use you as a success story for advertising, right? So anything that falls in that category. Then action faking. This is doing work that does not advance your true progress. This is basically busy work. They give you a whole lot of exercises that seem like they're going to result in progress, but you go 2-3 months down the line and you haven't actually improved at the skill. This is also a sort of self-delusion that we need to be careful of. A lot of people like focus on the things that they're already comfortable with and don't ever get out of their comfort zone, and that's what action faking is. So it's when you're doing a lot of work, but you're not doing any work that is actually productive for learning the skill that you're trying to learn. What are some green flags? If you go into the book and it has citations of peer-reviewed scientific research that demonstrates the efficacy of the things that it's telling you to do, love those books. Very uncommon, but when you find them, oh my god, they're gold. Specific, actionable exercises with ways to judge whether you're succeeding or failing. Excellent, excellent. Acknowledgements of limitations in knowledge, or acknowledgements of limitations to how far this book or this piece of media can help you achieve things. If the media acknowledges its limitations, that is not a red flag, that is a green flag. And also, much like finding good teachers, if it has recommendations from trusted, successful peers and other teachers, that's a green flag too. So that would be a little controversial. Here are some examples of what I think are good, mediocre, and bad media. Bigger, Leaner, Stronger by Mike Matthews. Lots of peer-reviewed evidence for the workout advice and diet advice that he gives. The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman has actual empirical evidence. This results in successful marriages. This does not. This leads to divorce. Face Your Fears by David Tolan. Practical exercises on how to overcome anxiety and fear. Mixed Bag Self-Help Books. Audition by Michael Shurtleff. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Clean Code by Bob Martin. All of these books I recommend. All of these books I love. But you know what they lack? They lack really good exercises to actually implement the things they suggest. They lack peer-reviewed evidence saying that the things that they recommend in these books actually lead to positive results. Sometimes that's because the peer-reviewed evidence is almost impossible to come by. Sometimes that's a thing. Now, these books are full of wisdom. They're full of good advice. They have good information that is practical and useful, and you need to incorporate it. But they are not as practically useful and well-established as the books that I listed in good self-help books. Bad self-help books. The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, or Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. The Rules by Ellen Fine and Sherry Schneider. Okay, and also any pickup artist book, right? So what makes these books bad? Every single one of these books has a grain of truth in them. They actually all have legitimately useful things inside of them, which is part of why they're so plausible and so successful. All of these are some of the best-selling self-help books of all time. But like The Secret, The Law of Attraction, right? There is benefit to positive thinking. there is a benefit to having a positive cognitive bias. The fact that that benefit exists doesn't mean that there are vibrations in the universe, and that the observer effect in quantum physics means that the way that you think causes the universe to change the way it develops. Alright? That's where it goes into the pseudoscience, that's where the book fails, and that's where it has some toxic qualities. Because then you start to think that you have magical powers, and that the bad things that happen in your life are your fault, not because of just unfortunate happenstance, and that is not good. Anyway, I'm just saying that be wary of things like this that have a lot of hype to them and use a lot of pseudoscience in order to back them up, but aren't actually falsifiable, don't actually back up their claims, don't have a lot of good exercises for you to follow, etc. If it lacks all those qualities, probably not a good media source. Peers of people who are also trying to learn the skill and are at approximately your skill level. They can be very useful to find teachers and books, etc. Peers who are unsuccessful and doing badly can be a warning of what not to do. And you can also have other types of relationships with peers. You can be friends with peers. You can have romantic relationships with peers. The only thing to be careful of is that rivalry is almost inevitable. And so those rivalries can be motivating, but they can also be destructive for your relationships with those people. So just be wary of that. Supporters are people who don't know hardly anything about your skill, but are invested in you being successful at it. So this can be your parents, your friends, your spouse, your siblings, your children, or indeed your boss, or if you have a financial sponsor who is invested in your success, that person too. They can be useful for rubber ducking. Rubber ducking is when you go to them and you try to explain the problem that you are trying to solve, and in the process of explaining it, you realize what it was that that actually the solution is. So it's a common thing in programming. I will sometimes explain the problem to my rubber duck right here, and in explaining it, I solve it. So you can do that with your friends. They can be shoulders to cry on when things go badly, and that can be very valuable. They can also celebrate with you when things go well. And in the case of a sponsor or parents or whatever else, they can offer you financial support, potentially, in the moments when you are desperate and need it. The last approach is stuff on your own. The first one being simply trying it out. This is a brand new skill, and this is often the very first thing that you do. I'm going to just dive right in and try to figure out exactly how to do this skill. I'm going to throw that football for the first time. I'm going to try singing my favorite pop song. I'm going to go running and see how far I can run without any training, right? So this can reveal natural talent. It can also reveal your weakness. And the problem is, if this is all that you ever do, you're going to hit a skill ceiling very quickly. And even if you have a lot of natural talent, you are eventually going to hit a skill ceiling, and you are going to need more advanced training approaches in order to compete with the most elite people in this skill. Another thing you can do on your own is imitation. And imitation is when you observe somebody who is performing the skill that you want to learn, and you try to figure out what it is that they are doing that makes them so good, and try to reverse engineer that on your own. So examples of this: you can read somebody else's code, you can watch someone else compete in a sport, you can listen to your favorite singer sing. There's a lot of risks to doing this. The person that you're imitating could have bad habits, and you could pick up those bad habits. You could misidentify what it is that they're doing that makes them so good, and thus adopt a bad habit that they don't have, but that you thought they had, and so you started practicing it. This is called cargo cult thinking. It comes from an old story in World War II, where basically people would radio in for supplies, and then planes would fly over and supplies would parachute down. And so these primitive tribes that lived on those islands would talk into sticks and try to get supplies to come down from that, and it actually resulted in the development of a religion in those islands. So basically, you go through the motions that you think result in the success, but they're not actually the things that result in the success. That's what cargo cult thinking is. So generally speaking, I think that there is a lot to be learned from imitating other people, but it is something to do when you are at an advanced level of skill. So as a singer, for example, I listen to a lot of professional singers, and I deliberately try imitating the way they are singing. But I can think, like, oh, they are manipulating their tongue in this particular way when they're doing this vowel. Oh, they're doing this kind of breath support. Oh, they are raising their larynx to get that sort of effect in the voice that they're doing. Like, I know the technique well enough to be able to imitate them effectively without hurting the way that I am singing. Okay, so leave imitation for an advanced level of skill. And until you reach that advanced level of skill, avoid imitating and focus on developing your technique and understanding through the use of teachers and media sources. Alright, let's move on to what you probably came to this video for, which is actual methodologies for learning skills. And let's start with intelligence-based skills. So just to briefly recap, intelligence-based skills are skills that are a function of understanding concepts. The more complex the concepts and the more concepts you have to learn, the harder it is to learn the skill. And learning an intelligence-based skill is different from mere memorization. Memorizing facts can be helpful for the skill, but the facts alone, memorizing them, are not in and of themselves the skill. So for example, I can memorize a massive list of diseases and symptoms, but the skill of being an effective diagnostician and working well with a patient is different from merely being a walking database. So what makes learning an intelligence-based skill difficult? So very common situation, you start in on learning a skill and maybe it initially comes easily, but at some point you hit a wall and then you get frustrated and you are reluctant to continue going forward because you think, oh, I just don't have a talent for this or whatever else, right? Or maybe it's an entire subject. Maybe there are some subjects that come very easily to you, but other subjects are much more difficult for you to learn, and so you have a tendency to avoid those other subjects. Another problem is motivation. If I'm getting frustrated, if I'm finding this thing unpleasant to learn, how do I get motivated to learn it in the first place? When I am studying it, do I get bored or distracted? If you don't like doing this, if you get distracted and would rather just work on your phone or play on your phone or something, how do you overcome those distractions? And maybe you have bad studying technique. Maybe you don't know how long you should study for. How often should you take breaks and how long should those breaks be? So let's touch on all of these things. So how do you get motivation for studying an intelligence-based skill? Oh, and by the way, a lot of what I'm talking about here is going to apply just as well to wisdom-based skills. It's just that these things are very good for intelligence-based skills in particular. So the first thing I would recommend is ask yourself, why do I want to learn this? Okay? What selfish reasons do I have for learning this? I want to learn French grammar because I want to travel to France and I want to be able to communicate with people well there. Because I want to be a singer of classical music and I want to pronounce the words and understand what I am singing well so I can deliver my songs effectively, right? So just identify the selfish reason why you are learning this skill in the first place and how learning this thing is going to be beneficial to you. You shouldn't have any have-tos or shoulds in your life. There is no, I have to learn French. It's, I want to learn French so that I can achieve X, Y, Z. I don't have to learn math. I want to learn math so I can achieve selfish thing that I want in my life, right? So the only thing that you have here is I want. And when you are coming from a place of I want instead of I have to, I think you're going to find that a lot of that procrastination just goes away because this is no longer an external thing being imposed on you by an imaginary slave master. This is, no, I am acting according to my own will and my own desires. And we don't tend to procrastinate the things that we want to do, right? So that is where I would start. The next thing I would try is reverse surf the urge. Surf the urge is a thing in dieting. Basically, like you have a cake that's sitting there, and you really want to eat the cake, but you don't want to because you're trying to lose weight. So you make a deal with yourself. You say, all right, I am going to wait 20 minutes, and if I still want to eat the cake after those 20 minutes are up, then I will allow myself to eat the cake. But otherwise, I'm just going to let it go. And the reason this works is because these urges, these impulses that we have, they're biological. They are a consequence of chemicals going into our brain and into our blood. And so if we simply wait a certain amount of time, usually those chemicals will subside and the urge will not be there anymore, and then we're not going to have that powerful desire to eat the cake or whatever. And so we resist it. And it's easier to say, I'm just going to wait 20 minutes than I can never have cake ever again, right? So when you're having trouble with procrastination, you do that in reverse. You say, I am going to work on this for 20 minutes. And if I don't want to work on it anymore after that, then I don't have to. And frequently what you're going to find happen is you start working for those 20 minutes and then you get really into it and you start enjoying the working that you're doing and enjoying the learning, and then you want to keep going. But if that winds up not happening, then you keep your promise to yourself. You honor that. You say, all right, I put in the 20 minutes, I still really don't want to do this, so I'm just going to let it go. And then you try again tomorrow or in 5 hours or whatever else is working for you. And then the last thing is reward yourself. Like, look for the pleasures in the things that you're doing. When you go to lift weights, you're releasing endorphins. It feels good. You look good. You feel good about yourself. When you are like studying this cool new thing, you are improving yourself. You're getting stronger. You're getting smarter. That's something to celebrate. Pat yourself on the back. Be proud of yourself and feel good about it. And then get addicted to that good feeling. All right, how do we deal with boredom? So first thing to understand is that boredom is an impulse. So hunger is an impulse that compels you to find food. Thirst is an impulse that compels you to find water. Boredom is an impulse that compels you to seek out dopamine-producing behavior, activities. So basically, like, I am being understimulated. I am not pursuing pleasurable things quickly and well enough. Please, human, flesh robot in which I am the brain, go and give me dopamine, right? That's what boredom is. So, understanding that boredom is an impulse to pursue dopamine, what you need to do is appreciate that your studying is insufficiently stimulating for your brain. Therefore, we need to make your studying more stimulating so that your brain finds it to be a dopamine-producing activity. And the way that we do that is by making it a little bit harder. So for example, like if you are bored at a very easy part of a video game, when you get to the boss fight, it's no longer going to be boring. It's going to be challenging, and it's going to be producing dopamine, and you're going to be having fun again, right? So we use a similar technique when we are bored studying. So what I would recommend that you do is, instead of studying to learn a skill or learn this particular exercise or whatever else, reframe it in your mind. Figure, I am studying this because I am going to teach this to another person. Which is, by the way, the reason that this YouTube channel exists, and the reason why my programming YouTube channel exists. I use the motivation of teaching others to force myself to understand a concept exceptionally well. So when you are studying something because you intend on teaching it to somebody else, you're going to be much more detail-oriented. You're going to be much better of an investigator. It's going to be a different kind of challenge. You are imagining this person that you're going to be teaching, asking you all of these challenging questions about this, and you need to be competent in order to explain it well. And so now you have turned your boring little exercise pedantic thing into a boss battle, into an exceptional challenge that you're going to rise to meet. So you've reframed it in a way that makes it more entertaining for you. This is an approach that works for me. Give it a try. I think it'll work for you too, but at least I hope it works for you too, because it works for me. Another thing you can do is you can prepare ahead of time to prevent boredom and distraction. So get all of your books, notebooks, browser tabs, everything that you're going to need in order to study. Get them all set up, so that way you're not needing to like open Firefox and browse the internet and do Google searches, all of those various things that could threaten you getting distracted because you want to go on social media and you want to play a video game or whatever else you're trying to do, right? Remove your phone, remove any tablets that you use to play video games, remove all of that stuff from the vicinity for the like hour and a half that you're going to be studying for. And Another thing you can do, study in a distinct location. If you have the ability to have a specific office that is dedicated exclusively to like study and work and intellectual pursuits, do that. Or go to the library, or go to a cafe, or something along those lines. Just isolate yourself from all of the distracting things in your life as well as you can, and you're going to find your study sessions significantly more productive. So now let's talk about what that studying methodology is. And what I am going to suggest to you is what is called the Pomodoro technique. And here's the essence of it. You are going to study in 20-minute increments. At the end of every 20 minutes, you are going to take a 5-minute break. Now, even if you feel like studying for longer than those 20 minutes, it is important that you stop and take that break. There are scientific reasons for doing this. There's evidence that taking regular scheduled breaks actually results in better studying success and better productivity in intellectual tasks. But even beyond that, there is a more important reason for that, and it is that we do not want your studying to be contingent on how you feel. So you don't want to sit down and start studying and then go, I'm feeling good, I want to keep on studying. And then once you've studied for 45 minutes, you burn out and you don't feel like studying anymore and you give up. As opposed to, I study for 20 minutes, I take a break for 5 minutes, I study for 20 minutes, I take a break for 5 minutes. You are very mechanistic about it, you are very structured about it, and you are basing it on habit, you are basing it on routine, rather than your present emotional state. And that is going to be much, much, much more effective to developing consistent study habits and having successful studying than if you are basing it on how you are feeling in that particular moment. While you are taking these breaks, do not go for your phone, do not go for social media or anything along those lines. If you can do something physical, that is going to be optimal. So go and take a 5-minute walk, go and do squats for 5 minutes, just pace around the room, do some pull-ups, anything along those lines. Or stimulate your brain in a completely different way, but don't stimulate it in a similar way. Don't go and study math and then think about a programming assignment for 5 minutes, okay? Don't be exhausting yourself during your breaks intellectually. Your breaks need to be actual breaks. Lastly, don't do more than 3 Pomodoros on a particular topic a day. And the first Pomodoro session that you do should be spent reviewing what you learned in your previous study session. And that'll really solidify everything in your mind and serve as a good warm-up for you every time you go down to study. Cool. All right, last and very, very much not least, wisdom-based skills. All right, so recap, wisdom-based skills, they require repetition and deliberate practice, and consistent daily practice is essential. You are at a minimum creating new neural pathways and connections in your brain that you are training to get stronger and stronger. And if it's an athletic skill, you are also training your muscles and your nerves to behave the way that you want to behave. Learning can be accelerated by identifying techniques and methods, but repeated practice is always essential. So let's talk about deliberate practice. You may have heard the 10,000 hours myth, that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at a given skill. This is based off an offhand comment from a survey of violinists that was publicized by Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers. And this is not true. There is obviously benefit to practicing a great deal, but it is not the sheer quantity of practice that is the primary operative measure, but the quality of practice. And specifically, when we are practicing, we are interested in what are called practice and feedback cycles. So essentially, this is usually done with a teacher. Several researchers have gone and tried to figure out what was it, like violinists or like athletes or whatever else, what was it that differentiated expert level professionals at a skill compared to amateurs? And the main difference that they identified was that amateurs tended to go at a skill and just practice it on their own over and over again, while professionals would go and work with a teacher And the teacher would give them feedback on what they were doing well and what they needed to improve and how they could improve it. And then those professionals would go and work on those specific things, come back, get feedback again, make adjustments, and continue that cycle over and over and over again until they were achieving an expert level at that skill, while the amateurs basically stagnated and plateaued at a certain level of skill well beneath that of the experts. So, how do we achieve that? How do we practice? We already talked about finding a good teacher. When you are practicing, you need to be practicing at the edge of your ability. If you are learning a particular song or whatever, right? I'm a singer. That's my main wisdom-based skill that I focus on, so that comes to my mind. So if I'm practicing a song to perform, that's one thing. But when I'm actually trying to improve my abilities as a singer, I need to be working at the edge of my ability. That's at the edge of my range, at the edge of my expressiveness, vowels where I am uncomfortable, techniques with which I'm uncomfortable, and so on. I then get feedback from my teacher, and then I learn from that. And teachers aren't the only ones who can give you feedback. You can give a performance and find out how that performance went. You can do whatever is appropriate for your skill. If you're an athlete, you play a game, you run a drill and get feedback from your coach or from the other players or so on, right? But the point is that you are practicing, you are engaging in your skill, and you are getting reactions and feedback on how well you did at your skill and how you can improve. And then you use that feedback to drive additional sessions of practice. Now, you maximize the effectiveness of this by making those practice and feedback cycles as short as possible. And by the way, when you are practicing right, you are going to feel like you are incompetent more often than not. Even though you are improving much faster than an amateur, you are going to feel like you constantly suck. So if you are feeling that way, that is probably a good sign. If you're feeling like you are already masterful and everything is easy, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. So how do you make your practice feedback cycles as short as possible? So one thing is, you go to your teacher more often, right? Sometimes teachers cost money, sometimes that's cost prohibitive. But generally speaking, you want to be going to your teacher as frequently as is reasonable. So however much time you need to be implementing the changes that you learn in your lessons, figure out what that time is, and then go to your teacher as often as possible while giving yourself enough time to do that kind of practice. Beyond that, what are other ways that you can get feedback? So for example, for singing, I make a deliberate point to go to an open mic night every Wednesday and force myself to perform as often as possible, so I get feedback that way. When I practice, I record myself performing, and that is an absolutely indispensable feedback mechanism. So I record myself, I listen to myself, I identify flaws in the way that I just sang, and I try to fix them. I record my next try and do it over and over and over again. So I am basically working as my own voice teacher there. And then when I identify things that I can't figure out, that's the stuff that I bring to my voice teacher to work on later on. Similar thing you can do with writing. You get peer feedback. You can use ChatGPT to get AI suggestions to give you feedback. You can write for low-stakes audiences like writers groups online and message boards and stuff like that. I wrote on Quora all the time and became a significantly improved writer by noticing what content I wrote that got a whole lot of upvotes and went viral versus the stuff that did not. If you are learning to program, you can do LeetCode, you can do mob programming meetups, you can get feedback from your coworkers, right? So try and be creative about this. What are all of the ways that I can get feedback, and how can I get feedback as quickly as possible and make that feedback as valuable as possible for me, and then incorporate it into my practice sessions? This is how you become an expert. This is how you become a master of a skill. In terms of improving the quality of your practice that is actually practice, not just getting feedback, identify specific sub-skills that you can focus on. When I am singing, I will focus specifically on vowels that I'm trying to do. I will focus on breath support and breathing properly. I will focus on posture. I will focus on acting and expressiveness. So what are sub-skills that when combined together will make my total skill more masterful in the way that I execute it? Try and break your skill down into those sub-skills and then practice them distinctly and individually and isolate them. Experiment in performing your skill in radically different ways and work at extremes. So I might be working on a song and I'll be like, I'll sing this like a rock and roll singer, and now I'll sing it like an opera singer, and now I'll sing it like a country singer. Even if I have no intention of performing it in that way, I will work in those extremes. When I was a climber, I would like experiment with climbing with only one foot, climbing with only one hand. I would try to climb without using the obvious path, right? Make new distinct challenges for yourself that you need to overcome to just make things a little bit more difficult and unusual for you. And once you have identified what works well in each of those unusual experiments, incorporate them into the way that you actually engage in your skill under normal circumstances. So now let's get into sort of subcategories of wisdom-based skills. I'm going to start with what I have called cognitive skills. And cognitive skills are sort of like meta skills that have to do with improving the way that your brain works and like growing your brain itself. So skills in this category would be like memorization, not like the act of memorizing, but getting better at memorizing things, getting better at studying, right? Musical ear training, very clear. Emotional control, willpower, right? These like cognitive abilities, brain-based abilities that you sort of need to just train over and over again. Now, all of these are probably different, right? But I've looked at some scientific research for like willpower. Like if you read The Willpower Instinct, it talks about some of the research here. And one of the things that you can do is meditate. And if you meditate for just 10 minutes a day, you actually get a rather significant benefit in terms of your overall willpower abilities. I'm doing a lot of musical ear training right now, and what I do is, first thing in the morning, I quiz myself on 50 intervals, and just do that every single morning. And I get a lot of benefit from that, and my improvement has been much faster than if I sit down and just try to study ear training for 60 minutes. So this has been my anecdotal experience with cognitive skills, and it's that what the key is that you need to do it really consistently every day, but that spending a lot of time on it has diminishing returns and doesn't actually improve it that much. So just spend 10 to 20 minutes on it and then just let it go. And just make sure to do it first thing in the morning the next day as well. If you spend a lot of time on it, you're liable to just frustrate yourself because you're not going to get any more benefit from it, and then you're liable to just give up. So when it comes to cognitive skills, if you're trying to become better at memorizing, short, frequent, consistent sessions are where it's at. Physical skills. These are skills that involve training muscle memory and may involve some degree of muscular training. So playing the piano, weightlifting, gymnastics, sewing, dance lessons. These are all physical skills. These are very different from the last thing we did in that you need to usually spend a significant amount of time. And the limiting factor of these is typically muscular exhaustion, right? There can be multiple limiting factors. Sometimes there is a point at which your brain simply cannot absorb any more stuff. But for me, at least, usually I am hitting my muscular limitations before I am hitting my cognitive limitations for learning a physical skill. So the money zone for these tends to be between like an hour to 2.5 hours, including breaks. And you want to be taking a break after at most 45 minutes, if not more frequently than that. I also want to differentiate between practicing at the edge of your ability versus practicing well-known stuff. So if I'm playing piano and I'm just doing scales, I can do scales a whole lot and it's not really going to exhaust me mentally or physically very much. But I'm also not going to be learning very much about piano technique by doing stuff that I already know. So if I'm preparing for a piano performance, then I'll just practice my repertoire. But if I am training to become a better pianist, I'm going to limit myself to like an hour and a half of that kind of training. So just differentiate between them. When people say they spend like 4 or 5 hours of piano, I am skeptical how much of that is deliberate practice and how much of that is just noodling around on stuff they already know. I suspect it's a lot more of the latter. Another thing to note for physical skills, after you have met your physical muscular limits, You can continue to mentally practice by visualizing the motions and visualizing the sorts of situations where you're going to be implementing your skill. So keep that in mind. If you need to practice additional time beyond what your body can handle, that is a potential additional way that you can practice. Also, like we just talked about, break the skill down into its component parts and deal with them separately. So like martial arts, practicing individual punches and kicks, practicing individual kata, so on. Dance, break it into individual steps, break the steps even into individual parts. That is going to help you out a lot more than trying to do everything in groupings all at once every single time. Performance skills, perhaps one of the most ambiguous category of skills out there. These are things that involve connecting with other human beings, acting, singing, giving speeches, comedy, and social banter. These are almost always instantaneously performed skills, and they're very difficult to practice on your own. They also tend to have very high social stakes, because, yeah, if you have crappy social skills and you offend somebody, they might not want to hang out with you anymore, and this can be particularly bad if it's at work or if it's in a social group where you value being able to hang out with everybody a lot. So the stakes tend to be pretty high and the cost of failure not good. So they can be practiced to a limited degree individually. You can use a mirror, you can video record yourself, you can audio record yourself and get some idea of how you sound. You can get feedback from trusted friends, and there are like social skills teachers. I do that sometimes myself, in fact. So you can do all of that, but at some point it's really just going to need to involve other people. So when you do that, find the lowest stakes environments to practice your performance skills possible. So if you're a singer, karaoke. Everybody assumes you're gonna suck. Everybody assumes you're gonna be drunk. Gonna be relatively low stakes. Groups of supportive friends. If you're doing speeches, go to Toastmasters. Everybody is there to improve their skills. It's okay if you're gonna be nervous and fumbling over your words. If you're really working on your social skills in particular, go somewhere where it's not gonna be a huge deal if you're awkward, right? Like if meetups with strangers, there's a lot of, for better or worse, there's a lot of awkward people who go to those. So the consequences of you being awkward is not going to be the most dire thing. Yeah. Then once you start to develop the skills, escalate to moderate stake scenarios. Go to open mic nights rather than karaoke. Perform cabaret performances. Go to open mic nights for your comedy shows. Socialize at friends' parties rather than just with strangers. And then when you're getting really comfortable, you can escalate to high stakes. You can do auditions and paid performances. And you can go on that date with your crush. Alright, so let's finish up by talking about some hurdles that we tend to face with wisdom-based skills. And they tend to be consistency. How do I get myself to practice every day? This is kind of related to motivation like we talked about before. Frustration. Progress with wisdom-based skills is notoriously slow and sometimes even seems to go backwards. How do you deal with that frustration? J-curve. You learn a new technique for how to bowl properly, and now your bowling scores are going down. Right? Sometimes you need to get worse before you learn your proper technique and start to get better again. Also, sometimes you get anxious and sometimes you procrastinate. So how do we deal with all that? So, to set yourself up for consistency, I recommend a technique called the implementation intention. This is a when-then or an if-then statement that triggers a specific action. So, for example, what I do for my ear training exercises. When I wake up, after I pee, I do 50 questions of ear training practice. When I break for lunch, I spend 30 minutes practicing piano. When I leave the office, I go to the gym. So what you are attempting to do here is you're attempting to identify a routine or a habit that you already have instilled in your life, and you're attaching your new positive behavior to that already existing habit. Try not to attach it to a time of day. That tends not to stick in your brain as well, because it's not a cognitive pathway that is being set up. It's something based on your wristwatch, and we don't tend to stick to that as well. So find a habit you have in your life and attach what you're trying to do, your practicing sessions, to that habit to make it consistent. When you find yourself getting frustrated, remember, surf the urge. Frustration is an emotion, and emotions are biological. Take a 10-minute break. Let the frustration chemicals dissipate. See if that helps you out. Remind yourself to enjoy the journey. That's perhaps the greatest piece of wisdom in this entire presentation, is that if you can take pleasure in all of the moments of the journey, in the process of learning, in the fact that the struggle is worthwhile and character building in its own right, that's half the battle right there. You're not trying to go for a destination with a wisdom-based skill. You're never going to be perfect at it, but you're always going to be getting better. You're always going to be becoming a stronger person, and that's the whole point of doing it. The struggle and the character building is as much a reason to pursue a wisdom-based skill as the actual achievement of that skill. So remind yourself of that anytime that you start to struggle a little bit. When you encounter an issue, write down, articulate exactly what the issue is. You can rubber duck about it, and sometimes that will help you come up with a solution. And if it doesn't, you know what to bring to your teacher. And if all else fails, just change it up. Do it in a radically different way from the way you were doing it before. I'm just making a note of the J-curve thing here. When you learn a new technique, sometimes you're going to get worse before you get better, and that can be extremely frustrating. It is okay to lean on your old way of doing things when you are performing, but don't do it while you're practicing. Your practicing should be dedicated, your deliberate practice should be dedicated to the new technique you're trying to learn. And then at some point you take the plunge and just say, I'm going to do this a new way at this new performance. So when that day comes, try to do it in a low-stakes environment. Emotionally and mentally prepare yourself for the possibility of failure, and continue practicing it in your deliberate practice sessions. And then eventually you will reach that point where you're now on the asymptotic part of the J-curve. And then you're just going to get better and better from there. But yeah, it can be hard getting through that J part. So you have anxiety when you're trying to pursue one of these wisdom-based skills, whether probably a performative one, a charisma, a social one. It's understandable. There's two approaches that I know of that are really effective for dealing with anxiety. One is exposure therapy, the other is cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. Exposure therapy is essentially you are facing the thing that scares you, okay? The book I mentioned before, Face Your Fears, very, very good book on this topic. I'm not going to get into exposure therapy in depth in this presentation, but that is where you should look. Cognitive behavioral therapy, you're basically identifying the thoughts in your head that are at the core of your anxiety. Why am I anxious? What belief is driving this anxiety, this fear? And then, is that belief based on distortions? Am I catastrophizing? Am I thinking that, like, the consequence of this one event is going to have repercussions for the entire rest of my life, when it won't? Identify any distorted thinking there and literally argue with it back in your head and journal about it and write down why that distorted thinking is wrong. And this can be extremely effective at dislodging that distorted thinking and relieving those anxious emotions and allowing you to do whatever it is skill that you're trying to do. Dealing with procrastination, once again, you don't have to do everything. Don't have any have-tos. Reframe it as a selfish behavior. Reverse surf the urge. 5-minute rule, if you can do it in less than 5 minutes, like a lot of our cognitive training things, just do it. Set it as a habit, set it as an implementation intention. Do some willpower workouts. There's a great book called The Willpower Instinct. I highly recommend looking it up for this sort of thing, but doing 10 minutes of meditation a day, doing things in a slightly unusual way, like opening all doors with your non-dominant hand, that can all increase your willpower. And lastly, willpower is kind of an emotion. We call it resolve. You ever just felt like, I am going to get things done today. I am going to accomplish what I want to accomplish. You ever have that feeling? You can induce that feeling in yourself by just remembering moments like that and getting yourself hyped up, or listening to music that helps you feel that resolved emotion. So induce the emotion of resolve in yourself and feel it. And it's all right, I'm going to accomplish things. And then go and do it. At least that's what I sometimes do. All right, that's all I have for y'all. So I hope you all found this useful This is like everything I know about this topic, and these are the things that I do that have helped me out a lot for learning skills. Learning everything from martial arts to Super Smash Bros, to StarCraft, to math and programming, to writing, like everything that I've done in my life. I do this stuff. I really hope it's helpful for you all. Feel free to email me, feel free to comment. Good luck. Have a good one.